Hello there. I was going to talk today about Aristophanes and Lysistrata. A very interesting play. I'll do a little bit of background. It requires a little bit of talking about it. This happened during the Peloponnesian War, which was a war between Sparta and Athens that lasted about 30 years. Enormous effect on Greek life. Husbands and wives basically didn't see each other. Fathers didn't really know their sons or their daughters. Women were kind of left to run society as much as they could. Slave class pretty much did all the heavy lifting, all the hard work. Lots of debt, lots of money just being wasted. Arts and literature, science, all put on hold for this war. So Lysistrata was a woman in this play, and she comes up with an idea of how to win the war. So she notices that, well, the Athenian women don't really have a lot of influence in politics, and the only place they really have any influence or control is in the bedroom. And essentially, women hate the war because, as I said before, they don't see their husbands. Entire generation of boys and young men know nothing of their fathers, so they're not getting any guidance there. Families aren't getting started. Young men and women, they don't get married because the war has pretty much disrupted everything. Lysistrata has to go out and try to convince these women to go on a sex strike. So word spreads around throughout the city of Athens. He even gets down to Sparta, where they want to do the same thing because they're sick of it too. They have a little difficulty doing this because they also have their own desires to deal with, and then they have to answer to all the husbands cajoling. So they decide they're going to take over the Acropolis, this giant rock in the middle of Athens. There's a temple to Athena there. And so they take it over, and this is sort of symbolic. She's the patron goddess of Athens, symbolizing all that's great about the city. And so taking it over is kind of a big deal. So the women board themselves up in there. The old men try to get them out. Ends up being just a big disaster. And the magistrate comes in and asks, well, what the hell's going on? The women say the men are barbarians. They're belligerent, they're crude. The men say that the women are fickle, they're stupid, they're meddlesome. And Lysistrata jumps in the middle and says, look, Athens, we deserve better than 30 years of war with nothing to show for it, but a crumbling society. Men and women, that we're just not getting along. We're not on the same team. We're fighting with each other instead of helping each other out. Basically, that whole scene up on the Acropolis sort of ends with no result for anyone other than the status quo. And then she emphasizes to the rest of the women, look, we've got to stay on side with this whole thing. You really have to keep it in your pants, so to speak. And this drives the men crazy. And so basically, the men start realizing that they have no control over the situation. The women are holding the line, and so the men draw up a bunch of police plans to send off to Sparta. As soon as they're about to leave, Spartans show up, their own peace plan, because the Spartan women had done the same thing, the same effect. So basically, this play represents that there's a sign that the seemingly powerless members of society, the women, actually do have control over some of the most fundamental functions of society, in a sense. It's funny because men get accused of thinking about only one thing, and when they're put under pressure of either glorifying themselves or their city or having sex with their wives, they choose the sex with their wives. And it's also funny because it shows that sexual desire is universal between the men and the women. But it's also, as much as Athens and Sparta had drastically different societies, they had one basic thing in common, that the men wanted to have sex. As well as the women in both societies wanted their society to at least stop crumbling. So women actually do have a say in the matter. So this whole thing was basically a setup, or at least like a It's a funny play, interesting talking point, but it shows the sort of timelessness of the battle of the sexes. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that for a few minutes. Because the cause of the battle of the sexes, I think men and women are always going to be different, obviously, for obvious reasons, but the differences get emphasized, and we turn into this battle of the sexes when the cause is basically when you get to a point where women will favor other women over the men of their own families. And when men favor other men over the women in their lives, that's when you have a major problem. And there are societal forces that, in these cases where the battle of the sexes has to be really, is so powerful or so just prominent in society, societal forces have to be stronger than familial bonds. So one way for this, in this case, the war was one way that this works, is that when the men are just never around their family, the familial bonds just break down because you don't even know who your family are anymore because you're never around. A government can be another way, where the government force will cause division between men and women, where the men will end up not being around their own families or the opposite sex at all. You could have a situation where that you start favoring men over women if you're a man. And ultimately, these external but still societal pressures come into play, is that there's a lack of empathy and a lack of sympathy caused by these powerful forces that make people hate their own mothers. Men hate their own mothers, daughters, wives, or it make women hate their own fathers, sons, or husbands. Make them dislike people who are the closest to them in life more than they would some stranger over the street. You would favor a stranger in the street because he happens to be the same sex as you over your own mother. Now, you really have to hate your own family, in order to favor some idiot on the street that you have never met. You don't know anything about this person other than it's a man, but you would favor him over your mother purely based on that sex basis. I mean, essentially, that is the fundamental sexual discrimination. So, basically means that the familial bonds have to be very weak. And once the familial bond, this family bond is weak, the stereotypes and a lack of empathy for the opposite sex are able to win over that. So you have to weaken your opponent, weaken one side just to make the other one. So essentially, you have very strong ties right here, and weak love for people of your own sex purely because they're own sex. If you have strong ties and they're weakened, this one wins out just by default. So you basically have to weaken this, either if you're trying to do this, you have to weaken those bonds, or something external weakens those bonds. And so you'd have to be brainwashed, subject to heavy propaganda to fall for it, or there has to be some cataclysmic event that causes society to break down in this way. Excuse me. And I think one way to avoid it is you need to be aware and make aware to others that our fate is tied to one another, in the sense that one family member cannot do well if others are doing badly. Because you care so much for the person doing badly, it's hard to be happy when one person in your family is doing happy, no matter what the sex is. If your daughter is doing badly and you're really, killing it at work, you're still not doing well in life. That we all are in the same basket, the same ship, and you have to be able to prefer your own family over some stranger in the street. I know it sounds very weird, but in some cases, it is happening in society today. So, we share in the joy, but we also share in the pain. That's all if the family bonds are strong. Now, if the family bond is weak, someone does well, who cares? I'm doing badly. Like my brother, if my sister, so to say, that I'm a man and that my sister's doing pretty well, but who cares? I'm having a terrible time. If somebody does badly, who cares? I'm doing well for myself. So it shows that you need to, like, more important than anything is to have love for one another. And I know that's a very strange and very, well, duh thing to say, but it's true. So I think, in order to prevent the battle of the sexes, you have to focus on what's important around you. And that's even if it includes the opposite sex. All right. Well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.